All right. I'm just gonna make sure everything's good to go. I think we're set. So first things first, thank you everybody for hopping on. As you can see, I'm actually in my store. So I'm at Supplements 101 doing this presentation. My name is Lori McLeod. I am a menopause practitioner as well. So I have the storefront as well as that. So I'm just letting a couple more people in. All right, I think we have that now. I apologize, I'm a little bit scared at the first here. I just don't want to miss any participants. All right, so first things first, I have worked within the health and wellness industry for, it'll be 20 years this year. So a big piece of that has been in like the sports, wellness, just holistic options and ways to support your body. I've worked with children right through to seniors, and like I said, in different capacities in a sales environment as well. And basically 2019, I decided it was time to get out of a corporate life and open my own business. And that brought me into Supplements 101. And since then, a lot's changed. And I had the opportunity myself to work with a doula and midwife team with my last child. So another story on that, but I'll get into it. And the support was so unique and different for me that I decided that I needed to really look into doula support. Ironically, as I did that, I came across menopause. So Doula Canada did a menopause practitioner course, and it was a 2-year self-study. And it really drew me in because in those 20 years that I've worked within the health and wellness industry, if anything has stood out to me, it was the lacking support, especially for women. I found that a lot of times when I was getting into discussions around whether it was sexual health, physical health, just mental health, like there's just a lot of stigmas and a lot of taboos, and especially around whether it was midlife and the menopausal period, like traditionally. And then as I went through this, I realized, hold on a minute, menopause itself is so stigmatized because while we look at it as in a lot of cases as an end of life, or, we're aging, we're not recognizing that one, a lot of people can be going through this at a very young age and are not getting the support, let alone going through the transition naturally at 40 plus. And, just a lot of the different things associated with that. So it's very unique, and it's unfortunate because, like I said, I've noticed just even in the years I've worked in a different side of the industry, how much support is needed. So I'm going to hop into it. Obviously, I'll keep an eye on the chat box, so I'll stop here and there sporadically. And if there's any questions, please feel free to ask me. If it's something I can answer on a whim, I will. If not, I'll leave it towards the end, and then we'll hop into it for a few minutes there. But I want you to know that no topic is off limits. I think that's one of the biggest things I can emphasize, and I talk with that in my consultations, is that, for example, sexual health is just as important as your physical health, and we need to stop minimizing and silencing those things. So if you have a question that maybe you're not comfortable asking on here, I will provide my information at the end as well, and I want you to reach out, okay? So the purpose of this is to just, like I said, break down walls and get the information out there. All right, so first things first, kind of went into a little bit. You get my face twice here now. My why. It was, when I went into school for this, it was simply to better support women. I didn't want to just look at the hormonal impacts. I wanted to look at, like I said, the limitations that we're encountering. I was actually surprised myself how much misinformation is out there. I knew the effects of ageism and menopause, but I don't think I fully recognized myself how I even was feeling that. And, if somebody had said to me, what's your thoughts? Because I myself am moving into that period, and I didn't realize, I guess, how minimized I felt in some ways. And like I said, not everybody has that. I want everybody to recognize that now. When I say this, I'm not generally speaking for everyone. A lot of times speaking for myself, or just speaking from, like I said, experiences that I've had. So it amazed me that at a time we have the absolute most information at our fingertips, and we look at all of the experiences and all of the things that we have available online, we also are at a point where we still have a lot of misinformation and just it's really scattered. I don't even know how to explain that. It blows my mind, because ultimately we put so much emphasis into our children going into puberty. We want to understand, want them to understand what's going on with their body and, just as a whole. And we also give them a lot of grace, but yet here we are going through what would be a reverse puberty and don't have a clear understanding. So that was the part, like I said in here, a little bit disheartening for me, but it also helped me to understand that we need advocates, we need people that are vocal, and we need people that are going to, allow this information to get out to the public and do it in a simplified manner. So that way there, when you're advocating for yourself with your own providers, you know what's going on, because don't take it for face value that they even know themselves. A lot of times people have not stayed on top of the studies, or it has been front and center. Unfortunately, like I said, menopause has kind of been backburnered in a lot of cases. So, all right. So first things first, let's jump into it. What is menopause? Pretty basic question. It gets a lot of mixed responses. So you technically are in menopause when you have gone 12 consecutive months without a period. Okay. If you get a period at month 10 and you're almost at the end of that, you reset the clock. It goes, you have to do 12 full months. The exception to that is if you've had your ovaries removed and you've gone into surgical menopause. So naturally, if that happens, you're waking up in menopause. I'm going to go into some of those differences as well through this presentation, so that maybe you'll have a better understanding as to, just what a full hysterectomy actually entails, when you actually do go menopause versus when you won't through surgery. And the other part of it too is the age range. The typical age range for natural menopause is going from 40 to 58. So we're talking about an almost 20-year gap right there. You can have 6 to 8 years of perimenopause symptoms leading up to that. I'll go into that a little bit more here in a moment. But there is exceptions to that. Okay, so roughly 5% of the population will go into its POI. So it's ovarian insufficiency. So long story short, you go into a natural menopause before the age of 40. The youngest case I have actually listened to and heard about was the 17-year-old young woman. I have heard of a 25-year-old. It is a little bit more rare because, like I said, the natural occurrence tends to be at 40 plus, but it's not unknown. It does happen, and that comes with a wealth of differences there. So I'll go into that a little bit on, what you should be doing for preventative care, what that might emotionally impact when you're going through natural menopause, at the 40 plus range, let alone at 17 to 30. So I'll get into that a little bit, but like I said, menopause itself is you're commencing your menses. So at 12 full months of no period, you're in menopause. Okay. The other part of that I can't emphasize enough, because there's a lot of misinformation around this, is that, a form of birth control is important throughout that whole period, as well as I would say the year after your menopause is you're actually in menopause. And the reason I say that is because the likelihood of twins, for example, heightens as we get close to menopause. And why is that? Because our ovaries sometimes are, we're having an ovulation and one egg releases, next month we're not getting anything. And next month you might have two. So I've had clients sit down with me and their own physician has said, oh, no, as long as you've gone 6 months, you're safe. If you do not want, if you're not looking to have a pregnancy, I encourage you to continue a form of birth control, whatever that may be, past your menopausal period, so up to a year afterwards, just to be safe on that end of things. And there is different forms of birth control that are better suited depending on age, history, different things like that. Your provider should be able to obviously give you a good understanding of that. But if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can at least give you the information that I do have and give you some guidance there. Just pulling up this chat, make sure there's nothing. And like I said, if you have questions, don't hesitate to even just pop on there, because it's just me kind of ranting here, so we'll keep it going. All right, so defining menopause. I mean, the menopause, body itself, like I said, sometimes is difficult. So now we know 12 months without a period. Okay, so what leads up to that? Well, first things first, you have the premenopause period. So that would be from the time that you are having your periods and you're moving into puberty right through to perimenopause. So perimenopause is the period in which it leads into menopause. So it's usually when you become symptomatic, if you're going to be. So you're going to notice that might be a time period that you're getting hot flashes. If there is anybody on, I heard there might be a couple from the UK, that would just be hot flushes for you. So any hot flushing or flashing, as well as, you know, night sweats, sleep disruptions. You might notice some fluctuation with your weight all of a sudden. We'll go into a lot of the symptoms here, but it's the symptomatic period typically. And it's also the time that you start noticing changes with your period. So perimenopause is that period of change, basically. So with your period, it might be a matter of, you know, you might have 2 or 3 months with nothing. And then all of a sudden you have a light flow, and then you might have a heavier period the next month. So there's some fluctuation there as well. For other people, it could mean very, very heavy periods. And a lot of times it doesn't last over a year or two, but speaking from my own experience, that's a long time to go through a lot of change like that. But I've had clients that, you know, even just standing up at times when they're having that heavy of a flow, it's like a lot of just gushing and disruption in their body, and they just feel out of sorts, and it makes it very difficult for their work environment and different things as well. So perimenopause is just, like I said, the change. The challenging part with perimenopause, and I'm going to get into the testing of hormones because that comes up as well, but it looks different for everybody. So there's no cut and dry cookie approach. I've had clients, you know, they're 42, they go to their doctor and they're told, oh, you're too young to go through it. No, you're not, for one, but your symptoms could completely vary from my own, for example. And my own could be different from the next individual. One thing we do know is that a lot of times what our mothers have experienced is typical as to our experiences. Same with puberty. It's very similar in a lot of cases. Also how your body, like how you handle symptoms in like PMS and different things when you're really young, getting your periods, that could also mimic in this stage. So for example, if you found you had really heavy painful periods when you were 12, 13, 14, you may notice at 42 through 44 the same type of effects there, and that's just your body and how it's responding to hormonal fluctuation. Menopause, as you see on the screen, we covered that. So at that point, you've been 12 full months of the period, you're moving into the postmenopausal period, which will be the remainder of your life, so another chapter, and at that point your fertility has ended. Okay, so it comes with a lot of different emotion. For some people, they're extremely excited because you don't have fertility at this point. For other people, like myself, you may have had a few children even, and it still has an emotional pull once our fertility ends. So it's not to even say that I would want to have any more children. It's just, it may be something that you're feeling within. And then as you'll see up at the top right there, like I said, POI, so primary ovarian insufficiency, a lot of lingo, you don't need to worry about that. And a lot of times we don't use that terminology often because insufficiency to me is not exactly the most inviting word, let alone going through a lot of change outside of, like I said, the menopausal period. So at that point, if you are under the age of 40 and have entered menopause, whether it's naturally or through surgery, that's the official term. But like I said, you've entered menopause. So hormonal changes in menopause. Let's see here. So 3 main hormones that you're going to have impacted throughout your menopausal period. So when I say that, I mean right from symptoms through to post-menopause. So we have estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. A lot of people are familiarized with testosterone. You hear about a little bit more. Estrogen more on, the main female hormone, okay? Estrogen for a lot of us is what causes a lot of the symptoms. So it is the main driver. We have 3 different forms of estrogen in our body, and there's receptors throughout our whole body, including even our stomach. So when you look at, the fluctuations of estrogen, it really peaks and dips. It really just depends on how the day is, how the night is. There's a lot of change, and it can fluctuate, like I said, within a few minutes, your hormonal levels. Progesterone, you don't hear about progesterone as much unless you're doing, of course, like if you're familiar taking birth control pills or anything like that. But progesterone is really what supports gestation. Oh my goodness, I can't speak today. So it's promoting pregnancy, right? So what that's doing is it's preparing your uterus. So it's getting the lining thickened. It's, getting everything in that around your ovulation, just get everything prepped for pregnancy. And of course, if there is no pregnancy, that's when you're going to have menstruation and your progesterone just drops. Okay. For the most part, we think of progesterone around the uterine, just for uterine lining. So it influences the thickness of it. So if you have had your uterus removed, that is more than likely why you wouldn't be taking progesterone in even a hormone therapy unless there was a need. For example, it can support sleep and it can alleviate headaches. So it might be a specific need, but a lot of times estrogen tends to be more of the main driver we're talking about. And testosterone, we often think of that as the opposite. We think of it as the male hormone, but realistically, it is still a female hormone. It's just at a lower level. It's our sex hormone. So as we move in through perimenopause, I often hear that as well, that I have really low libido. I don't know what's going on. I'm just not feeling like myself. A lot of times that can be affiliated to the testosterone level dipping down. Although it's low, when you start dipping that down even more, it's still going to affect how our body responds. And as I know down there, it can support mood and energy. Estrogen plays into that as well, but it's something we want to be mindful of. In Canada, we don't typically talk a lot about testosterone when it comes to hormone therapy for women. Okay, so it's something that I'm not even sure if I have a client that is currently taking testosterone. For anybody that's in the UK, I know it's a little bit more, at least more available. And I do follow some individuals in the States, and depending on the state, testosterone can be more readily accessible for women, but it's not something that's common. A lot of times we focus more on estrogen. Just checking the chat window, make sure I didn't leave anybody in limbo here. Okay, so one of the questions that often comes up to me is testing hormones. And I often hear that. It's like, well, I'll just get my hormones tested, or my doctor is going to test my hormones. Not saying you can't do that, but as I've noted on here, because you're having such immense fluctuations, and I'm talking about day to day and potentially hour to hour, testing your estrogen, for example, it's not going to be effective. So your body, if you're feeling good, for example, at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and you go get your blood work done, well, guess what? Your hormones are probably pretty level at that point. Whereas if you stepped in at 2 a.m. having a night sweat, you may feel a little bit different in that regard. So your blood work will reflect something totally different. That's what makes it really challenging to find out if you're truly going into menopause. Now, with that being said, that perimenopausal period, like I said, for some women, it may be a year or 2. It could be quick. Other people could range up to 8 years. So as you get closer to the menopause side and you're getting closer to that, you will notice a couple hormones that they can test more easily. And at the bottom here, you'll see circle FSH, which is your follicle stimulating hormone. And on the other side, you're seeing LH, which is luteinizing hormone. Those 2 hormones, when your estrogen starts going like a little bit out of whack and all of a sudden it starts dipping down, for example, your FSH, your follicle stimulating hormone, that is what tells your body, like it's like, hey, ovary, release an egg. It's go time, it's time. And if your body normally would respond and be like, okay, time to release an egg, and away it goes. It's happy. All of a sudden, and I'm kind of simplifying this so that hopefully if you're having testing done yourself, you can reference this point. But if all of a sudden, let's say this month, the follicle stimulating hormone's like, hey, ovary, release an egg, and nothing happens. It's like, hey, did you hear me? get this moving. Come on, we got to keep it going. We have a deadline, and your body doesn't respond. It starts getting like fired up. It starts releasing more and more of the follicle stimulating hormone, which naturally raises it in your body. If that's at a really high level, we know like, okay, you're heading to menopause. Like I said, it takes time though to get to that point. So if you're in the earlier stages of perimenopause or you're really unsure, it's not a cut and dry, easy answer, but it definitely tends to be raised significantly the closer you get to menopause. Your luteinizing hormone is just the opposite of that. So it's what, really is saying, hey, time to release the progesterone. Once again, your body responds, does this normal thing, and your body's, it's happy, it just continues on its way. But if the same thing occurs, and all of a sudden it's like, progesterone, come on, like let's get the uterine lining moving, let's get things thickened up, it's time for ovulation. If your body's not responding, it's going to do the same thing. So those two are going to go high. Okay, so as your other hormones, so your estrogen, progesterone dip, these two are going up. So like I said, I have had individuals that have had their follicle stimulating hormone tested that have had better success knowing, but hormones are really tricky to test and get a true response, okay, and know exactly what's going on. I will say that if you are symptomatic and there is certain things like, for example, changes in your period, and you're noticing heavy flow, light flow, it's like shortened, like all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm normally like 5 to 6 days and now I'm 3. Those are all good indications that you are heading into menopause, okay? All right, so the next slide, I put a focus like slide here for surgical menopause, but like I had mentioned, there is different stages of life that we can enter menopause. And as I go through this presentation, a lot of times because the studies have been done on women over the age of 40, for example, you'll notice a lot of the reference points are around, midlife or later life. I want anybody on here that's under the age of 40 to know that that stigma needs to be broken, and we need to start helping women understand that it can be normal at younger ages. It can, there's a lot of change that comes with it. But the reason I say that is because we are in the dark as a society. Like, we're in the dark as women a lot of times when it comes to our health in this regard, let alone if you are 30, for example, and you're having surgical menopause. So if that happens, you need to know what preventative measures you should be taking. And a lot of times I find this is not disclosed. A lot of times the focus, for example, if you've had endometriosis and you're just relieved that you're going to have the pain settle, that you're not going to have, maybe really heavy, painful periods, that can be, that may seem to you like, okay, like this is a win-win. And it can very well be, but I need you to understand that there's going to be different things in your health that you want to look at. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. Just quickly pulling this up. Okay, so Mary, I'm going to hop into your question here in a second. Hang on one sec there. Okay, so with surgical menopause, it's funny because even the terminology, we don't tend to use correctly, and that includes myself until I had this training. It is crazy to me to think that if anybody had walked up to me in the street and said, hey, Lori, what's a full hysterectomy? My initial thought was, well, everything's removed. So that would be the cervix, the uterus, the fallopian tubes, and ovaries. That's not the case. A full hysterectomy is literally the uterus and the cervix. Okay? The reason that matters is because if you think about it, even terminology, so if I have a client that comes in and says, well, I've had a full hysterectomy, and in their mind, that meant, everything's been removed. The outcome's different than just having the uterus removed. So if the next individual has that understanding and they're like, well, I had a full hysterectomy, thinking it's just the uterus and cervix, it's a different outcome. So when I say that, your cervix, uterus, and fallopian tubes have nothing to do with menopause. Okay, so if you are going in for surgery because you have endometriosis, for example, and you're having your, let's say your cervix and your uterus removed, you are still, you're not in menopause. You are still releasing an egg. Your body is still handling estrogen in the same manner. You can have your fallopian tubes removed and still have the same response. Your body is not in menopause. You can have one ovary removed, and once again, you're not in menopause. Your other ovary will compensate. So the key here is when you're talking to your provider, and let's say you're going to have surgery, one of the things that often comes up to me is, well, I'm just having my ovaries removed because I'm already in surgery anyway. I was told that there's a risk of ovarian cancer. I strongly encourage everybody to, one, ask for those numbers, because under general circumstances, and if you yourself have not had cancer, it is minuscule. I believe it's around 1%. I don't know the specific stats, but it's around 1% when it comes to ovarian cancer. Now, with that being said, if you remove both your ovaries and you wake up in menopause, you have to look at the fact that if you are 30, for example, and you've had both ovaries removed, one thing that estrogen also controls is your bone density. So although you may be thinking, down the road, like osteoporosis, like 50, 60, 70, 80, you need to take a more preventative measure, because your bone density could deteriorate at a different rate. It could be different because of the fact that you've gone into a surgical menopause a lot younger. Not to scare anybody either. I want everybody to know that, like, when I say this, I'm only saying it for educational purposes. And the great part about 2022 is that we do have access to different supplements, different food supports, pharmaceuticals, different things to help support these different things that could, be affected from an earlier menopause. So not, like I said, not take away from it. But what blows my mind is often we don't even talk about it. So all of a sudden you go in with one understanding, like, great, I'm getting rid of like pain and discomfort and things, I'm going to be able to handle, my day-to-day more effectively. But you also want to know what the other impacts could be. So another area, and I'll talk about this a little bit more too, is vaginal atrophy. So I had a client who, let's say mid-30s, had surgical menopause. And about 6 months later, they were complaining because they couldn't have sex anymore. They were having a lot of pain and discomfort, a lot of dryness, and they didn't know what was going on. And their provider really didn't give any insight on it. And that's so typical of vaginal atrophy, because estrogen is what controls a lot of the suppleness in our body and lubrication. So if you think about that from joints and different things, our vaginal tract, no different. Okay, so we no longer produce estrogen. What that does is it causes everything kind of like the walls to shrink down and thin, which can cause a lot of that pain and discomfort. You don't have the same level of lubrication in your body. So it's affecting that individual different, and something that you may not even realize was going to be a potential outcome. The great part, once again, is that there is fairly easy supports for that. So vaginal moisturizers that you can just get pharmacies over the counter. If you, for example, I live in Pictou County, Nova Scotia. So about 40 minutes from here, there is there's Teasdale Apothecary, which is a natural vaginal moisturizer you can get. So if you don't want a lot of preservatives and different things, that helps replenish the vaginal tract so that you're getting moisture back in and helps to relieve that discomfort. You can also get a vaginal estrogen. And a lot of times, I'll talk about that briefly if we have time on this session, if not the next one. And vaginal estrogen, so whether it's a ring, a suppository, there's different forms. It's like birth control. It stays localized to the vagina. So for a lot of individuals, I find when we're talking about this, they'll say, well, I'm a little bit hesitant on estrogen therapy or like a hormone replacement. I don't want cancer. So I'm going to go into a little bit about that. But in this particular case, if it's localized to the vagina, it stays there. Okay, so you're not getting a lot of transfer out into the bloodstream. The first couple weeks, possibly. So you may take it and all of a sudden notice a little bit of like breast tenderness, or you just don't feel like, you know, you just feel this change like you will when you first get pregnant, right? For a lot of us, at least. And it might be like you just notice a little bit of pain, discomfort, maybe feel a little bit more tender. So for anybody who has no children and as you've led into your period and you've noticed those things, it's the same thing with an estrogen therapy. But if it's localized within a couple weeks, once those walls build back up a bit, it alleviates that. It's not transferring again. So just like I said, food for thought on that. So I'm going to hop over to the chat here just to go back up. All right. So for anybody that's had specifically their uterus removed, I've run into this with some clients as well. And it's like, well, how do I know? And it's not clear cut. If both your ovaries are still intact, we'll say, then your general, like that range goes from 40 to 58. The average age of menopause is in around 51. So we know that if you're in and around that 50s range, there's a good chance that you're moving into menopause. The other symptoms could help figure that out as well. So aside from testing the FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, that won't have any impact because your uterus is removed. That's strictly connecting and communicating with your ovaries. You can have that tested. The other thing is the symptoms. So you may still notice you're up with the birds, or you're having a hard time sleeping. You may notice night sweats or hot flashes or flushing. You may notice all of a sudden you're getting some shifting in your weight. And it's like, wow, I'm getting more through my midsection or hips, and I'm not changing anything else. Like my diet's relatively the same. Everything's the same, but I'm noticing that. What that could be is estrogen dominance. So because of that fluctuation, your estrogen's peaking and then dipping down. And that fluctuation is causing a lot of times for us to notice more weight gain around the midsection or hips. A lot of times it's more symptomatic if you don't have a period to rely on to kind of give you that indication. And like I said, you could talk to your physician about having your FSH and LH tested there as well. As for what you can do to take care of yourself, I mean, the other part of it too is, like, obviously I work within natural health. So I always try to be mindful to not have a biases on natural health. Obviously it tends to be my own personal preference, but whenever I sit down with anybody and I'm doing a consultation, I try to be mindful of the fact that you may want to take a pharmaceutical approach. You may want to look at natural options or supplements. So we can definitely talk about that. So I think it really comes down to this, what your body's response is. But with that being said, a few things that you can do to care for yourself. In today's world, I can't speak for everybody watching this right now, but I can tell you we tend to be very stressed. We are constantly balancing. It's that balancing act, as we're moving into this stage of life. It could be that you're dealing with aging parents and a lot of uncertainties. You may have children like myself that have, my oldest is 21. She's out on her own. That comes with a different level of stress. I also have a 1-year-old. That comes with a different level of stress. And the day-to-day, we're often outside the home 40 plus hours a week, then also balancing in the house. And the reason I'm bringing this up, everybody has different stress factors, okay? This stage of life typically comes with a lot of, change and reflection too. You can get natural supplements to support that. So for example, there is products like, and I'm just generally speaking for right now, I'd have to talk to somebody one-on-one to really get a better gauge, but something like, rhodiola, ashwagandha, those herbs are adaptogens. They help your body cope with stress and change. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of times when we're heading into menopause, so as we're going through the perimenopausal period, because our ovaries are not releasing estrogen, in the same manner, a lot of times what happens is our adrenal glands all of a sudden start kicking in a little bit of estrogen to kind of offset the symptom. Well, to keep it simple, if you've been going through a lot of stress, or you've had a lot of trauma in your life, or let's say, you're recently divorced, or they just have like a lot of heightened stuff going on, you want to keep in mind that your adrenal glands almost get like clogged up. All of a sudden it's like your body's not handling stress. And I've been guilty of this, where I'll say, oh yeah, like I put everything in compartments and I'm trying my best to balance everything. And then all of a sudden, you notice those compartments start overflowing and you're just not feeling well. That could be associated to your menopause because your body, you know, it's already affected in one manner. And then we're adding in the fact you know, adrenal fatigue and you're just not feeling well. I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can here. So I apologize if it's not coming across like that. Feel free to, you know, throw something else in the chat there as well if you need a follow up on that. But I hope that helps. A lot of times I talk about different diet supports, supplement supports, and then, like I said, if pharmaceutical is a preferred option, I do go there as much as I can and know. Otherwise, I refer you to the correct providers as well. Does your fallopian tubes play a role? I mentioned that a bit, but just to kind of keep it simple, no, they don't. The best analogy I had when I was going through training was, and I'm one of those people where I like to keep things simplified. I can talk all day long, but sometimes we just overcomplicate things. So your uterus, I always say, is like a little house. Okay, it doesn't really play a factor there. Your fallopian tubes are more of the transportation to the house, but really it's your ovaries that are kind of like the control centers. So they're the ones that are shipping out. They're the ones that are getting everything to your house. They're doing everything, but your ovaries are the key component to menopause. And to go back to that point, like I said, just try to, if you can, if you're having discussions with your provider, unless you have a specific need yourself to have both removed, I strongly encourage you to open the discussion about keeping one ovary. Now, with keeping one ovary, like I had said, you're going to have that one ovary typically compensate for the loss of the other, but it can mean that your menopause will naturally occur about 5 years sooner. Okay, so it just, like I said, it just speeds things up a little bit, and everybody responds in different manners once again. But what that ensures is that you're not waking up in menopause, and it's helping with, like I said, whether we're looking at your bone density, whether we're looking at your sexual health, mental health, physical health, like there's just different factors. And I am a person that would say there is a time and place. If both ovaries need to be removed, so be it. What should be occurring then is more of a plan for your health. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen often, I find, even in follow-up appointments. A lot of times that's because OBs have limited knowledge in this regard, and that's fine. That might not be the case that they're going into this, but I strongly encourage you, if you can, get somebody, even whether it's myself or somebody like me, because what I normally do is like a surgical prep and then follow up to see, like, okay, how are things going, and really looking at those symptoms, because if you don't know it, I mean, general public doesn't know what menopause entails. Like all of a sudden, you yourself are going through these symptoms and they're random and strange to you. At least then, by educating yourself, you're better prepared to advocate for yourself as well. And yes, the awake a lot at night, that is a key for a lot of women. We talk about that a lot, where we will say, like, hey, I'm waking up 3 or 4 times a night, and you might not even be having night sweats. You might wake up and you're just laying there and can't get back to sleep, or you might be getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning. I know I remember myself, even when I was younger, I often think, like, why does my mother get up like so early when none of us need her anymore in the mornings? And then now I understand that. I myself am getting to understand it. So like I said, just food for thought. Just going through here. So these messages, I'm not sure if, I guess it goes to anybody anyway. Okay. So to the question of, just going back here, and I apologize, I can answer this at the end, but I'm going to hop in and just answer these couple of things over on the topic. If you've been on an estrogen blocker due to cancer, this is going to sound crazy, but a lot of times you can actually still take hormone replacement. The actual guideline, and not for everybody. So Jerry, just to this point, it really comes down to your own provider, of course, but there's a lot of misinformation around hormone therapy. So I'll try to explain that a little bit towards the end here, but If you can't have it because of specific reasons, of course, if it's a matter of because you have breast cancer, this is what your doctor's saying, kind of using a general guide. The real risk factor is usually within that first year to 3 years. Once you hit 5 years, it's minimized quite a bit. I don't get a lot of clients, that's just personally that I've had, that are at the 7+ year mark, still on a blocker. So there might be different factors here that I don't know. But as for what you can do because you're really struggling, I think what would help is to know kind of some of the symptoms that you're going through. And then that way there, I can give a better answer on that. For some people, when they say really struggling, they're like, holy crap, I'm having like 20 hot flashes a day. I'm going crazy. So the outcome of that client is going to be different than, hey, listen, I'm having a lot of brain fog and I'm really feeling like an emotional pull. I don't feel like myself. And I'll be honest, one of the common things that comes up to me is I feel crazy. You're not crazy. Your hormones are fluctuating. So that if it's something like that, that's where I come in to kind of help guide things. So I hope I'm answering this as best as I can with limited information, but I want you to know after this is over, don't feel you have to put it on the chat and stuff. You're welcome to reach out to me and I'd be happy to at least give you some guidance in that sense too. But bottom line, nobody should be left struggling. Like there is enough supports out here. We should be getting support and not struggling in silence. Okay, so okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to push the last couple questions here towards the end because they're great questions. Thank you to everybody sending them in. But the reason I want to do that is because HRT, so hormone replacement therapy, they usually refer to it as just HT. So if you see me interchange that, that's all it means. There's a lot of updates to that that we are not well versed in as a society or professionally. So I'm just going to give you some insight here. So any of the questions I haven't answered yet, I'm going to, but I'm going to pop down towards the end because I think it deserves at least a couple minutes exclusively. So thank you. Continue to send them in. I hope that, like I said, everybody's taking something out of this. I know it can be a little bit wordy and I'm doing my best to kind of move it along here, but keep sending in the questions and I will make sure that I'm answering them as I go along here. Okay. So yes, just to finalize this slide, full hysterectomy strictly means your uterus and your cervix are removed. If you are having your ovaries removed, it's actually, they don't give you all the lingo in here and you may not remember this, I can send it to you, but it's called an oophorectomy. So if you have an oophorectomy, you're having one ovary removed. If you're having a bilateral oophorectomy, that means that both ovaries are removed. So it's a lot of terminology, which is why a lot of times we just say partial or full. The problem with that is that it doesn't sum up what's actually going on. One individual may have a different understanding of that than the next, cause a lot of confusion. And I've had individuals that don't know if they're menopause because they don't fully know what was removed just by being told it was a full hysterectomy. So, you know, it's interesting to see kind of how we've been guided through this. And I'm fortunate because a lot of times, like I said, how do you prepare if you don't know yourself? I'm just going to grab a drink of my coffee here and move over to the next slide. And like I said, keep sending in questions. I'm happy to answer them as I go here. All right, so I wasn't sure where to place this slide because I wanted to kind of explain the basics of menopause, that terminology about, you know, whether it's perimenopause, menopause. But initial thoughts, you know, this is something I went through myself when I went in to start this training. I really challenged my own stigmas and my own bias around menopause and really looked at what impacts me. So for example, you know, it says in here, not everybody. I've had clients myself that have been over the moon excited to go into menopause. And I wish that every woman would get to that point. But unfortunately, it hasn't been the case for a lot of us. And the reason I say that, as I noted in here, is, you know, a lot of times we're anticipating the dreadful symptoms. We're also fearful of aging. We live in a society where youthfulness overcomes wisdom. And it's unfortunate because I can speak for myself. If somebody could say, if you know, and I'm speaking from a natural menopause around 40, if somebody said, would you go back to 20 today? I would often say, only if I had the knowledge that I do now. I don't really want to relive the choices maybe I made back then. But we put so much emphasis on youthfulness and we're flooded with it. If you look at marketing campaigns, you know, I've dealt a lot with the natural health side, and unfortunately I've worked within diet culture as well a long time and never really pieced together just how detrimental some of these campaigns can really be. And now that I'm on this side of things and I'm looking at this from more of a holistic stance and looking at women's health and different things, it blows my mind just how much we have been targeted. And I'm going to go into that a little bit, but and I was a little unsure whether or not to even post about this because not everybody's going to have similar views, but it really stood out to me. And I think for a lot of us and a lot of my clients, when I've spoken to them, they'll say, you know, I moved into menopause and I just felt invisible. And it's sad. It's sad to think like we're so focused on youthfulness and not aging that we discredit what we bring to the table at this stage of life. So I'll go into that a little bit, but like I said, one key point that I want you to really think about after this, if you can, is it your own thoughts? You know, if you yourself are struggling with symptoms, of course, you're going to have a bias on, you know, you're going to feel a certain way towards menopause. But if you're going into menopause or you're postmenopausal and all of a sudden, like you're feeling maybe a sense of even like loss or emptiness or different things, like everybody's going to handle it differently and emotionally face this different as well. But is that your own thoughts or was it influenced by societal standards? And like I said, I'm going to leave that there. I'm not going to persuade anybody one way or the other, but I really encourage you to think about it. And this is part of the reason I started to. So one of the first things that I did was hop onto Google. Now, if you're in the UK, you want to look up your own specific area. I looked up menopause. I think I put in menopause Canada, maybe, plus women. This is, and these pictures are actually still on the positive end. So looks really appealing to me. I mean, I can't say that I can't see how happy and, you know, prepared they feel. Every single picture looks like it's depressing, it's hard, it's challenging. And like I said, these were the easier pictures. Like I had quite a few pictures that I had to filter through when I initially did my schooling that I looked at and thought, oh, like the way we're portrayed, like menopause as a whole. Like, can you imagine if you are that, you know, let's say you're 25 going through a natural menopause right now, and like you're Googling and it's like, it's like, wow, I should really be excited for next chapter. And let alone and then to look at it, if you're natural menopause at 55, and it's disheartening when this is what we're looking at. And like I said, these are staged pictures, mind you, but I very rarely came across anything that was about excitement. And I know there may be some of you listening to this, are like, okay, excitement about what? Well, excitement about your next chapter of life. You know, there's so much change that comes with midlife, and it's not all negative. Like there's a lot of positive changes that come in this next chapter of life. And I'm going to go into that a little bit here in a second. But like I said, it's interesting to see how we have perceived it. And the other thing too, I just put in the pictures really around like hot flashes, exhaustion, night sweats, stuff like that. But there was a lot of weight loss targeted ads. That's the other thing you will come up is a lot. Targeting us to lose weight, you know, get back your youthfulness. And it doesn't really, to me, generate what menopause represents, but society is pushing this agenda, I guess. So the history of menopause, I'm going to try to keep this brief so I don't keep everybody on here all day. So like I noted in here, while we look at menopause at times as like an end of life occurrence, it's not. At one point it actually was. So menopause has really only been researched since late 1800s. I think the first studies were published in 1897. So if you look at that in the, realm of our life, it's really only a few generations that we've started studying menopause. At that point though, let's say you're great to great, depending on age, grandparents, your life expectancy has dramatically increased. So at one point, our life expectancy wasn't much over 50. It might have been 55. Today, the average expectancy for women is 81. So if we're looking at menopause as an end of life occurrence, we're potentially throwing away another adulthood. So it's crazy because, like I said, society hasn't kept up to this point, but we're not end of life, and it's not any negativity around that. It's actually just opening up the next chapter of our adulthood. So I'm not going to rhyme off too much here because, like I said, it could take a while, but the first studies that started in late 1800s, since then, unfortunately, as much as there's been studies around hormones and health, I find that the women's health has still been backburnered even to today. The main studies that were done around hormone replacement therapy, that I'll explain here in a few moments, they should almost be obsolete now. They should not be referenced because of the way they were handled. But unfortunately, when you have that big of a study, so the Women's Health Initiative was the largest women's study to date. And it ran for, I believe it was 11 to 12 years, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was a 15-year campaign. They would cut it short because they started noticing increases on cancers. So breast cancer, cervical cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancers, bone loss. Like there was different factors that strokes, heart attacks. Anybody, if you mention HRT, if you go hormone replacement, including myself, a lot of us will go, yikes, until I looked into it deeper and realized, no, it was kind of how they chose the participants that caused a lot of the outcome. And we know things different today than we did even 20 years ago. So to this point, though, I just wanted to quickly mention, since 1897, it's amazing to me when you look back at old studies, because a lot of times, even then, when we moved into the 1900s, doctors took a very different approach. It was still looked at as a natural occurrence to go through menopause, even if it was, later in life at that point. But they took a very natural approach. So it was like, loosen your corset, watch the temperatures. If you're noticing you're getting a lot of hot flashes, eat well, try to eat a balanced diet. It was a different time. It wasn't until around, I believe it was 1920s, that if you were elite or you had, the means to do so, and you've had your ovaries removed, they were then providing estrogen therapy through cow ovaries. So you'd have fresh cow ovaries, but that wasn't available to everybody. And a lot of doctors still didn't take that approach. They actually would still say, no, listen, it's still a natural occurrence. There is ways we can naturally address this. And then all of a sudden we moved into the 30s, and that's when the real first hormone replacement therapies started. So through pill forms. And we did learn over the years, naturally, that, for example, I believe it was in the 40s that were the first documented cases of cervical and I believe it was uterine cancer was the first ones that were surfacing. But then we learned that you can't just give estrogen therapy to somebody that has a uterus, because, as I mentioned at the start, the one hormone that controls the uterus lining is progesterone. So we've learned at that point, okay, well, if we pair the two together, we're going to have a different response. We've also learned in the years to follow that delivery is also part of it. So I know for the doctors I follow in the UK, a lot of times using a lot of topicals. So it might be like a topical estrogen, and then you get a micronized progesterone that you would take and ingest. But it's a lot of topical patches, creams, gels, things like that. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense, because it's going directly into the bloodstream, which is where your hormones are going to be. So you're going to get a better response. If you're ingesting, depending on what the chemical makeup is of that particular one, you want to think about that it's still having to go through the liver. There's still going to be other impacts. You may not get the same dosage. I find pill form locally is still promoted heavily in my area, but there's different delivery methods that we've learned is more effective and safer, and It depends on the individual and the need, but like I said, if you have a uterus, you need progesterone. It controls that, so it reduces the risk of your uterine cancer. But one thing I wanted to bring up in this, and kind of ties into the last slide, was that when I was doing it was basically the history of menopause. The one part that stood out to me was in I believe it was the start in the 40s, but really 50s and 60s, there was a huge marketing campaign pharmaceutically that was done. And in that campaign, a lot of times doctors, it depended on who you spoke to still. Some took the natural method. And like I said, the science was still young and there's a time and place. So I don't want anybody to hear this and go, okay, well, she works in natural health. There's a time and place. But there was a widespread campaign, even though they had some concerns around HRT at that point, because they, like I said, were still trying to figure it out, but whether or not it would cause breast cancer or uterine cancers or anything like that. They also, had a lot of doctors still with the mindset of, listen, it's natural and we can control a lot of our symptoms through care. So whether that's, lowering stress and looking at what we're eating and, and back then we didn't have the preservatives and junk we do in our food today. So, I mean, it was a different, like I said, it was just different. But this widespread campaign started around youthfulness. So there is actually, you can look up cartoons. I can't remember the name of it. It was in a newspaper, even a local newspaper back in the 50s and 60s. And it would, basically, it would highlight ways for you to stay youthful for your spouse. Hey, ladies, this is how you keep your husband through HRT. Okay, so if you think about it, estrogen therapy, that is what's controlling a lot of like the suppleness in our skin, different things. And as it declines, naturally our skin changes. So they've seen it as a campaign avenue, and they start really highlighting ways for us to stay youthful. On the other side of it, they did door-to-door campaigns even, and they go speak to, at that point, a lot of husbands, and would say, hey, listen, you want to keep your wife, young. This is what you should get her on. So it became a different marketing play. So for me, it's like there's one thing when you're looking at the benefits, benefits, risk, of course, you got to do what's best for you. But when campaigning like that started, I really, truly question the influence that had on today. I wonder, how many of us, from that point forward felt that there was a need for us to maintain this high, crazy expectation, and to also look at why we should be doing therapy, hormone replacement therapy and different things. So it's been stigmatized in different ways. And then past that point, once we get into like the 60s plus, menopause actually publicly changed from a natural occurrence to a disease and ways to manage this disease. It took a whole different spin. So if you think about a natural occurrence versus, okay, we're going into menopause, which is, a disease has a different stigma to me than a natural occurrence. So we've really, in a few generations, have had a lot of different verbiage and different impacts on us. And I truly think that it impacts how we look at today. So like I said, I won't ramble on any further on that. I can. It really opened my eyes to a lot when I was going through the studies myself, but I bring that to you because, when we look at the history of it and we look at how it's been implemented in different strategies, whether it's through a natural or pharmaceutical, and it can have impacts on how we ourselves are looking at menopause today, which doesn't have to be the case. So I'll stop talking on that topic. All right, just checking here, make sure. All right, so I'm going to skip over this this slide here. I won't go into. I was having difficulty earlier playing it, but I summarized a lot of it in here. So Dr. Jen Gunter, she has a couple different books out. The most recent, I believe it's still most recent, was the Menopause Manifesto. She puts a lot of great information in that book. Like I said, I have no affiliation to her or the book or anything, but it's laid out well. A lot of key points, and she just simplifies just a lot of the taboos and stigmas around menopause and looking at the effects of ageism looking at how, you know, culturally we've been silenced. And unfortunately, when we do that, it's really challenging to, one, get correct information out publicly. And secondly, if you're talking amongst a group of friends, for example, you may not even know what the next individual is experiencing because we don't even know what to ask. So it kind of limits what we should be doing. So it was an interesting, just this clip was really good. Like I said, I had a hard time playing it earlier, but if you just look up Dispelling Common Myths About Menopause, like it says there, this was highlighted on global news. I believe the original broadcast was 2021, but like I said, I couldn't get it to play earlier. So I'm going to try, I'm saving for the end. There's one video I'm hoping I can get to play. But if you have questions or you're looking for this link, reach out to me and I'll be happy to pass along to you. So, all right, so I'm going to quickly jump into, I say quickly, probably the bulk of why most of you are on here is symptoms and coping. So there is a wealth of change that comes with menopause when you have everything from hormonal fluctuation to changes within your social circles, because we often talk about that, change with midlife. And you look at environmental factors and, you know, what your personal space has been like, what's your workspace, it can all impact how you're feeling at this stage of life, as well as the emotional changes. Because like I said, a lot of times, I mean, I was talking to one client and they said, I can cry at the drop of a hat. And the next individual is like, oh, I just feel so like this pent up anger, or, you know, I'm having a lot of old trauma, like for example, from like this one individual, it was like a car accident and it was resurfacing. They were noticing a lot of the feelings and stuff they were having associated to 10, 15 years ago coming back now. It's a period of change. And with change, like I said, this is such an interesting time of life because we're looking ahead at what life entails, but we're also reflecting on how fast it went. So if you think about it, you're like, oh, you know, 20 years went by, it seems like in the blink of an eye. Then you're really looking at what the next 20, 30 years entails and how not to waste it. And in other cases, it might be that you've gone through a lot and you're trying to find peace and different things. So it's a very interesting time, but every single woman handles it different. And that is what makes it really challenging. Like I said, in a silenced society, is that if all of a sudden I'm not having any hot flashes, I'm not getting any of those symptoms, but for me, I'm getting a lot of dry eye and I'm noticing my mood is way off and I don't feel good. I feel almost depressed. You know, the next individual doesn't have that. It makes it so challenging to kind of work through this. So going into the first point I wanted to mention was physical change. So with this, obviously skin, aside from, you know, being campaigned on weight loss, because like I said, our fluctuation of hormones definitely impacts our weight. The other side of it was how to keep your skin supple and different things. So as our estrogen dips, it can have an impact naturally on your natural skin, like just the suppleness, collagen production. We're looking at the hot flashes, the night sweats we'd be looking at, and those are vasomotor symptoms. So they're a little harder to address because there's no clear scientific answer as to why we get hot flashes and night sweats, but we do know a few culprits. We know caffeine can trigger them, stress can trigger them, and if your diet and sleep is wonky, that can also trigger them. Now, with that being said, like we had talked about earlier, sleep tends to be a primary concern for a lot of women going through this stage. So it almost causes that roller coaster effect, and it's like one thing's rolling into the next. The other part I wanted to mention, I just had a few, actually have a note here because this is my normal consultation. So a few of the questions that I typically will ask on there is, do you get a lot of fluid retention or bloat? Are you noticing changes with your digestion? Because like I said, you have estrogen receptors in your stomach as well. Do you notice your heart's racing? And it could be if you go to even stand up, or maybe you're just sitting, you're getting some palpitations. Sugar cravings. A lot of times we don't realize that as we're going into menopause, we may have not just sugar cravings, but alcohol cravings. So it's a little bit different there. Dry eyes, joint stiffness and pain. And then of course we can move into like hair and skin being a little bit more dry, noticing like fine lines on our face, And then I mentioned on here, there's all different symptoms, of course, but the other one that tends to come up that people don't think about is itchy skin, or that sensation of crawling. That can happen too with the changes in your hormones. So a lot of physical change going through this period. And like I said, for some individuals, they handle it totally different than the next. But I do find that there is different things we can do to support our systems effectively and to kind of get through it as easily as we can. Like I said, there's no need to suffer. Sexual health and intimacy. This is one of those topics that nobody wants to talk about, but yet we often have a lot of women that are going through change and are sitting quietly. So when I had said this towards the start of this, that I had a client who was, mid-30s having vaginal, pain, dryness, pain, discomfort during sex. If you only knew how many times I've had that same discussion, it's actually disheartening, because I have had, clients that will say, I don't even want to go away with my spouse because, I don't enjoy this aspect of my life anymore. I actually fear it. It's painful. I've had people message me and say, hey, listen, I didn't want to bring this up, but I'm scared that my spouse is going to leave because I love them, but I can't even show them. And when I say sexual health, it doesn't have to encompass just, intercourse. Okay. I'm talking about intimacy as a whole and feeling disconnected at this stage of life. There is fairly easy solutions, especially if it's a matter of localized support. So needing help with the pain, discomfort, and dryness, there is support out there. And like I said, you can go into a pharmacy and pick it up, just a vaginal moisturizer. Your doctor can prescribe you just vaginal estrogen. If you've been on estrogen blockers, even, you may not, right now your doctor may not recommend a pill form, a topical, or anything. Vaginal estrogen is localized to your vagina. So therefore, you can often, and when I say often, I've yet to run into a client that can't use a vaginal estrogen and still have blockers for their system. It's just disheartening for me, because when we think of menopause and we talk about the top symptom, I would safely say 90% of clients I've had would say, oh, easy, hot flashes. If you actually put those same women in a room and have them fill out, just a questionnaire privately, 73% come back as the top symptom is vaginal dryness. And yet we don't talk about it. I've had clients that have gone to their follow-up after hysterectomies, or, they're having, maybe they've been struggling with different health conditions, and they're not even told about this. I actually had one, I'm allowing somebody else in here. I had one individual who because it's pretty straightforward, the symptom, like it's not a difficult one to identify. And they left here and went to their gynecologist and were point blank told, nope, that's not what it is. Even though, keeping in mind, their ovaries were removed and the symptom was pretty straightforward. And they told them, just don't have sex again. First of all, like that's great if that's your personal choice. That is not up to somebody else to make that determining factor. That individual showed back up at my door, very upset, because they weren't sure how they were going to speak to their spouse. Like this should not be how our health is handled. And although we don't want to recognize and talk about sexual health, our sexual health is just as important as every other aspect of our health. It all ties into how we feel. Whether, if we choose, not to partake in sexual activities, that's our choice. Same as it should be our choice if we do. And I find that silence, can you imagine the feeling? Like if that individual didn't talk to me and said like, well, no, hang on a minute. Let's try a different avenue here. We'll try a different doctor and just talk again. Like you'd take that information and I can't even imagine how alone you feel with that information. And it's just sad. Like, we live in a society where you can go get a blue pill at any point. We don't minimize, erectile dysfunction. We don't say, oh, well, it's just fact of life. We offer support. We offer, care to those clients. Do we not deserve the same? And that to me, like I said, it's an avenue of this that I didn't realize would probably, bring me to a different level of training down the road, but I won't stay too far on this now because I realize not for everybody. But we need to, like I said, break the stigmas around this because there is help. And anybody, if you're watching this and this is something you've been going through, whether it's, decreased libido, vaginal dryness, discomfort, pain, bleeding during intercourse, anything like that, I need you to know that there's help out there, and that you're not alone. Okay. I had one client, and I'll be quiet for this, went away on, they're just really fortunate. I have a great circle of friends. And I think there was 12 or 13. I want to say 12, went away, and they decided to open this conversation up, and 7 out of 12 hadn't even been intimate with their partners in, I think it was 12 to 14 months, like it ranged. And not one of them, it was because they didn't want to. It's because it was too painful and they didn't enjoy it. And to me, it's like, wow, like that's such a small glimpse. And there's so many other people that are suffering. So, like I said, if you have questions around this, I'll provide my contact at the end and reach out to me. All right, so emotional changes. As I mentioned, like I said, I won't hold you up. I've kind of covered a lot of different things here. One that I find comes up with this is irritability. You notice that everything's just bothering you, even like the sound of people chewing. I've had that come up in different consults, like I can't handle it anymore. Restlessness, might feel anxious, but unknowingly, like nothing stands out any different than your day-to-day. You might also have a heck of a lot less patience. That's one thing I can say is a lot of us, like, it's just like, you just notice, like you just don't have the patience like you used to. Forgetfulness, brain fog. I've had, clients that are like, I swear, like, I'm losing my mind. Like, I can't remember anything. I'm walking into rooms, I don't even know what I'm talking about, or I'm in the middle of sentences and I don't know what I'm talking about. That all comes with the fluctuation in your estrogen specifically. It causes a lot of emotional change and a lot of changes in like your memory, even short term, because it's just, hormones just play so many factors in our body and we minimize it. But the good thing, like I said, they tend to be short term, things that we can alleviate, whether, like I said, it could be stress that's piling on, that's causing a lot of the forgetfulness. Like there's usually something behind the scenes. And I always tell people that's the great part about holistic support. Like for myself, a lot of times I'm not treating just the symptom. I'm sitting back going, okay, like if this and this is going on, what's causing it? Like there's always that cause effect. And a lot of times we don't back it up a little bit more. And with this one here, it could also be an increase. I wanted to mention headaches, migraines. If you find that you're just getting the blues, or I did put like if you feel a lot of depression, but a lot of times we don't quite know what depression entails. So I would say like you just don't feel like yourself. You just kind of feel blah and you're feeling down, or just, you're not excited for life. I mean, that's not typical for how you feel day to day or how you felt in the past. Like that could all be associated right to the fluctuation in your estrogen. Okay, so there is an end in sight. There is supports we can offer in that sense as well. I apologize. I'm looking at my notes here because I just wanted to make sure there was nothing that there was nothing else that stood out there. One thing I wanted to mention too, I forgot to say this with the physical change, increase, like a heightened sense of smell is also one to keep in mind. That could be yourself. All of a sudden you're like, what is that? That could be your surroundings. You might notice things that you never noticed before. I've had people even camping this summer that were, they've talked about how nobody around the campfire could smell this smell, but it was driving them crazy all weekend. Chances are it was their own hormonal fluctuation, but we don't talk about it. And I only laugh because like in this particular circumstance, they were like, oh, I owe a lot of apologies. I was really blunt and direct because I thought everybody was going crazy. But yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, just the sheer impact of the change. And it's like I said, it's not all negative, but I think it helps when you at least know like, oh, that is what's correlated to. Okay, great. Now how do I address it? So the last point I want to make here around this environment and social factors. So obviously, if you're dealing with a lot of hot flashes, night sweats, I encourage you to look at your, your home environment. Like, if you're like myself, and if things are really cluttered, or messy, I struggle with being able to feel calm. That calmness will affect hot flashing. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's one of those things where, we know stress is a factor. So whether we're handling stress, ourselves, it could come out in different ways, and hot flashes could be one. Looking at your bedding. So try to get, away from synthetic sheets and things like that. Try to use cotton, or, if you're fortunate and you can get those cooling sheets and stuff, or anything of that, just to kind of help regulate the body temperature a little bit better. Fans or air conditioning, like whatever your preference is on that. Just more of your bedroom and personal space to try to help, especially if you're getting a lot of those symptoms. Social, like I said, we typically are reflecting, we're looking at our life ahead and different factors, and a lot of change can come in this period of life. It's not necessarily a negative, but we tend, like I said, to look at our surroundings as well and how it all impacts us. If you are around a lot of negativity, you might notice that it's really affecting you differently than maybe it did 10 years ago. So just something to be mindful of, and what we can control. So I'm just kind of jumping in. I'm doing great timing today. Last couple slides here, I want to answer a couple questions, but if there is anything I can take from this, I think that, I guess, looking at symptoms, looking at different factors, how our body responds to menopause, education is key, without a doubt. Knowing what's going on helps us kind of target and alleviate symptoms, helps us kind of look at the future and different things. But our mindset is such a critical piece of the puzzle. If you're moving into menopause and you are dreading it, and you can't even believe, like, okay, it's natural menopause, maybe you're 45, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm 45, and there could be somebody listening to 70 right now going, well, 45, but it's, if you're dreading this chapter of life, not guaranteeing it, but you're probably going to be more symptomatic. You're probably going to take everything that's going on and feel the full depth of it. If you're dreading the fact that you're aging, I can tell you that, these fine lines are probably going to stand out a lot more. We got to get beyond the surface. Like that's one thing about this. I read this article, and it was talking about, for example, in Indian culture, women coming into age 40 to 60, because I'm using, just like I said, general studies here, are the most celebrated. It's a chapter of life when we move into menopause that we look at, all of the wisdom, all of the experience, all of the goodness we bring to the table at this stage of life. And yet in our own culture here, we discredit it and minimize it, and we brush it off, and we look at youthful. And I stress that a lot because it is thrown in our face nonstop. But it's amazing to me, like if you shift your mindset and look at, wow, like look at what you have accomplished. And it's not always a matter of the job or this or that. Like it could be a matter of like personal things, personal challenges. It could be your circle of friends that you've disconnected with. It could be addictions that you've overcome. It could be different things in your life, that you can celebrate, that you no longer are within, or that you've learned from, or whatever it is. And looking at this next chapter that is not the end. Okay, it is so far from the end for most of us that, you're going to spend more of your life as a menopausal woman in a lot of cases than you are even in our adult life prior. That's crazy. So I encourage you to look at your own mindset and how you're looking at menopause, because it's not everybody that goes through that. But I can tell you, in the discussions I have, a lot of us are feeling, a little bit uneasy about this transition, and not because of symptoms, but because of society. And yeah, I just, like I said, I wanted to kind of mention that. So I'm so used to being face to face with people. I apologize because I can ramble on, but it really, really was something, even personally, I challenged myself on. So I'm going to see if this clip will play here. It might not. I had a lot of challenge with this earlier. If it doesn't, hang on, I think it might be loaded. We'll see. So let's see here, it pops up. Hang on 1 second, if I can pull it up through. Okay. I'm just gonna send a message here. You're gonna see it show up in the chat. Jen, I'm not sure if you're still on, but I may run like 5 minutes over. Is that okay? Can you just answer for me in the chat window, or anybody at Lotus Center if I play this? That awesome, thank you. As you can tell, everybody, I'm super savvy when it comes to this, but I really think I'm gonna play this clip. It is 11 minutes long. It's gonna bring us a few minutes over, and this is kind of winding down to the very end, but I really, truly enjoyed Jane Fonda's take on the life's third act. And I really hope, in summary, that it gives you, just a different outlook when it comes to menopause. So I'm going to stop rambling on. I'll let you listen to this, and then I'll wrap it up. Can you guys hear it? Thank you.
There have been many revolutions over the last century, but perhaps none as significant as the longevity revolution. We are living, on average today, 34 years longer than our great-grandparents did. Think about that. That's an entire second adult lifetime that's been added to our lifespan. And yet, for the most part, our culture has not come to terms with what this means. We're still living with the old paradigm of age as an arch. That's the metaphor, the old metaphor. You're born, you peak at midlife, and decline into decrepitude. Age as pathology. But many people today, philosophers, artists, doctors, scientists, are taking a new look at what I call the third act, the last 3 decades of life. They realize that this is actually a developmental stage of life with its own significance, as different from midlife as adolescence is from childhood. And they are asking, we should all be asking, how do we use this time? How do we live it successfully? What is the appropriate new metaphor for aging? I've spent the last year researching and writing about this subject, and I have come to find that a more appropriate metaphor for aging is a staircase. The upward ascension of the human spirit, bringing us into wisdom, wholeness, and authenticity. Age not at all as pathology, age as potential. And guess what? This potential is not for the lucky few. It turns out most people over 50 feel better, are less stressed, less hostile, less anxious. We tend to see commonalities more than differences. Some of the studies even say we're happier. This is not what I expected, trust me. I come from a long line of depressives. As I was approaching my late 40s, when I would wake up in the morning, my first 6 thoughts would all be negative. And I got scared. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to become a crotchety old lady. But now that I am actually smack dab in the middle of my own third act, I realize I've never been happier. I have such a powerful feeling of well-being. And I've discovered that when you're inside oldness, as opposed to looking at it from the outside, fear subsides. You realize you're still yourself, maybe even more so. You know, Picasso once said, it takes a long time to become young. I don't want to romanticize aging. Obviously, there's no guarantee that it can be a time of fruition and growth. Some of it is a matter of luck. Some of it, obviously, is genetic. 1/3 of it, in fact, is genetic, and there isn't much we can do about that. But that means that 2/3 of how well we do in the third act, we can do something about. We're going to discuss what we can do to make these added years really successful and use them to make a difference. Now, let me say something about the staircase, which may seem like an odd metaphor for seniors, given the fact that many seniors are challenged by stairs, myself included. As you may know, the entire world operates on a universal law, entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy means that everything in the world, everything is in a state of decline and decay, the arch. There's only one exception to this universal law, and that is the human spirit, which can continue to evolve upwards, the staircase, bringing us into wholeness, authenticity, and wisdom. And here's an example of what I mean. This upward ascension can happen even in the face of extreme physical challenges. About 3 years ago, I read an article in the New York Times. It was about a man named Neil Selinger, 57 years old, a retired lawyer, who had joined the writers group at Sarah Lawrence, where he found his writer's voice. 2 years later, he was diagnosed with ALS, commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a terrible disease. It's fatal. It wastes the body, but the mind remains intact. In this article, Mr. Selinger wrote the following to describe what was happening to him. And I quote, "As my muscles weakened, my writing became stronger. As I slowly lost my speech, I gained my voice. As I diminished, I grew. As I lost so much, I finally started to find myself." Neil Selinger, to me, is the embodiment of mounting the staircase in his third act. Now, we're all born with spirit, all of us, but sometimes it gets tamped down beneath the challenges of life, violence, abuse, neglect. Perhaps our parents suffered from depression. Perhaps they weren't able to love us beyond how we performed in the world. Perhaps we still suffer from a psychic pain, a wound. Perhaps we feel that many of our relationships have not had closure, and so we can feel unfinished. Perhaps the task of the third act is to finish up the task of finishing ourselves. For me, it began as I was approaching my third act, my 60th birthday. How was I supposed to live it? What was I supposed to accomplish in this final act? And I realized that in order to know where I was going, I had to know where I'd been. And so I went back and I studied my first two acts, trying to see who I was then, who I really was, not who my parents or other people told me I was or treated me like I was, but who was I? Who were my parents? Not as parents, but as people. Who were my grandparents? How did they treat my parents? These kinds of things. I discovered a couple of years later that this process that I had gone through is called by psychologists doing a life review, and they say it can give new significance and clarity and meaning to a person's life. You may discover, as I did, that a lot of things that you used to think were your fault, a lot of things that you used to think about yourself, really had nothing to do with you. It wasn't your fault. You're just fine. And you're able to go back and forgive them and forgive yourself. You're able to free yourself from your past. You can work to change your relationship to your past. Now, while I was writing about this, I came upon a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a German psychiatrist who'd spent 5 years in a Nazi concentration camp. And he wrote that while he was in the camp, he could tell, should they ever be released, which of the people would be okay and which would not. And he wrote this: "Everything you have in life can be taken from you except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation. This is what determines the quality of the life we've lived, not whether we've been rich or poor, famous or unknown, healthy or suffering. What determines our quality of life is how we relate to these realities, what kind of meaning we assign them, what kind of attitude we cling to about them, what state of mind we allow them to trigger. Perhaps the central purpose of the third act is to go back and to try, if appropriate, to change our relationship to the past. It turns out that cognitive research shows when we are able to do this, it manifests neurologically. Neural pathways are created in the brain. You see, if you have, over time, reacted negatively to past events in people, neural pathways are laid down by chemical and electrical signals that are sent through the brain. And over time, these neural pathways become hardwired. They become the norm, even if it's bad for us because it causes us stress and anxiety. If, however, we can go back and alter our relationship, revision our relationship to past people and events, neural pathways can change. And if we can maintain the more positive feelings about the past, that becomes the new norm. It's like resetting a thermostat. You know, it's not having experiences that make us wise. It's reflecting on the experiences that we've had that makes us wise and that helps us become whole, brings wisdom and authenticity. It helps us become what we might have been. Women start off whole, don't we? I mean, as girls, we're feisty. Yeah, who says? We have agency. We are the subjects of our own lives. But very often, many if not most of us, when we hit puberty, we start worrying about fitting in and being popular. And we become the subjects and objects of other people's lives. But now, in our third acts, it may be possible for us to circle back to where we started and know it for the first time. And if we can do that, it will not just be for ourselves. Older women are the largest demographic in the world. If we can go back and redefine ourselves and become whole, this will create a cultural shift in the world. And it will give an example to younger generations so that they can reconceive their own lifespan. Thank you very much.
All righty. Just hang on one second, just repositioning this. All right, so I'm a few minutes over here. I'm just going to leave the last piece. I'm going to move it into the next meeting that we have. I am going to take 1 second, though, just to quickly answer a couple questions. And like I said, if anybody has any specific questions, I know I'm seeing here there was a note that came up from the Lotus Center. So I just wanted to mention that if you want, jot down my email. My name is Lori McLeod, and it's thrivingin.menopause@gmail.com. So you're welcome to, like I said, message me through there. My business here, the storefront, is Supplements 101. If it's easier, you're welcome to go into there as well. Thank you, Jen. So Thriving in Menopause. So definitely reach out for specifics. For anybody who is looking for links to the talk stuff, just like I said, send me a message directly. And I just want to make sure I don't overlook any of the questions here, because I was just going back. I definitely am here to support you. I can give you as much information, and like I said, also talk to you about what it is that I do on a separate note if you have questions there. But as for HRT, what I'm going to do, hormone replacement therapy, I'm going to talk about that on the December 13th piece, because it might take a few minutes to go through it. I just want to ensure, like I said, that I have as much information available to anybody who is interested in it. And I'm just kind of checking here because I thought there was one more question. So sorry, I'm just reading this. So if you, to the individual who wrote about having uterus full of fibroids and considering a hysterectomy, no, if you do not necessarily need hormone replacement. Like I said, I can discuss that more in detail in the next one, but that, well, one, it's your decision. And I want to encourage you to make that decision for yourself and not, don't feel like you're dedicated to what your provider says. But your uterus removal wouldn't have anything to do with the hormone replacement therapy. Typically that is when, like I said, if you're having a lot of symptoms because you've gone into natural menopause and you're choosing to take that approach, you definitely can. But like I said, you're welcome to reach out to me one-on-one and I'd be happy to help you. All right, so I just, like I said, to wrap this up, I apologize. I'm a person that usually loves to see people in person. I'm sure you can tell. I really, truly want to thank everybody for taking the time to hop on here. It's, like I said, not a topic that we often get into in detail. I hope I kept it light. I hope I kept you interested. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help. Otherwise, I will see you at the next workshop in December. Thank you, everybody.